Welcome back to the House Judiciary Committee this Tuesday afternoon, April 15th. We're going to be looking at a short form bill, which I'm going to have to take a motion to get it off the wall. But just to give folks a heads up, this is a bill that just considering to see if we want to maybe put it into the miscellaneous judiciary bill to put the idea, because even the short form might actually be as long as the long form bill actually would be, frankly, because it's a fairly narrow language change in law. But we'll have testimony on the idea and see if this is something that witnesses support, and if we support it, then we can think about putting it into the miscellaneous bill. But to get started, I need a motion to take H490 off the wall, so to speak, to take up H490 short form bill.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Yes.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, so we can look at H490, and we'll start with Josh. Josh Rutherford from Joshua Rutherford from Department of Corrections. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Never met you in person.
No? What have you heard though? Is it good, bad?
Well, you should hear the way he talks about it.
I'm sure. Let me just get this up and running.
Definitely exchanged a lot of emails.
I exchange a ton of emails. It's a bane of my existence some weeks. Maybe if you can do it, Isaac, that would be.
Okay.
There's just very little in the corner. Oh, wait a minute, Isaac, I might have it now. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for the technical piece. Joshua Rutherford, I'm the Facilities Division Deputy Director with the Department of Corrections. Here to talk a little bit about 60-hour sentences in Bill 490. So this is the number of these we have. So we're averaging a little under 7 a month. That's up a little bit in January, but with 3 months, or in 2025, but with 3 months, it's really too early to rely on those numbers. So I think the first and most important thing is that this is not a dramatic impact on the Department of Corrections either way you go with that. If you leave these folks with us, there's an impact, and I will talk about that. But we're not talking about a lot of people. And if you do change it, it's not going to make a huge impact in sort of giving us more resources. There is one, but it's not dramatic either way. However, when somebody comes into our system, we do have to do our full booking process. Whether they're there for 1 hour or 10 years, we do our booking process. So we gather demographic information. We take their fingerprints. We do the sexual violence screening tool, the Columbia Suicide Severity Scale, and then we do a medical intake. There's additional pieces that happen at 5-day classification, which these folks wouldn't have. But this is the process of a couple of hours, and this all has to happen within the first 4 hours that somebody's incarcerated. So we do have to do that for everybody, irrespective of how long they're with us. Generally speaking, the way these sentences are structured is folks usually come in on Friday evening and leave on Monday morning. Not always. Folks work it around job schedules, but very often that's what works for folks. Is I work during the week, come in on a Friday. For reasons I'm going to talk about in just a second, we keep these folks in admissions, so they stay in our admissions area. Admissions is, especially on the weekends, one of the busier areas of the facility. So they are taking up a bed in that area. Again, not a lot of people, but they are taking up a bed in that area, in that admissions areas. We don't offer anything to these folks in terms of interventions. In a course of 60 hours, I don't know if there's anything that we could offer that would actually be meaningful in that short a period of time. And then when you add on to that the number that I might only have one such person, in a month at a given facility, there's no way to structure a program or an intervention I can give to that person. So they're coming in, they're serving 60 hours. The department is not providing any services to them other than sort of the basic meals, medication, sort of things like that. And we do try and avoid contact with general population.
Doctor.
Yeah. Go ahead, sir.
Would there be anything like, any outside services that could be able to come in, like Act One used to do in the days of, CTOP?
We haven't. I don't know that there's anything precluding us. I think it would depend on their resources. And if that was something they were willing to do, it is sort of we'll have one person this weekend and then maybe nobody else the rest of the month, which just makes it not advantageous for us. Many of these folks are on probation. And so where there are services, those services are usually provided during their community time, not necessarily in that 60-hour period.
I missed if you said the gender breakdown and what happens if the same process is happening in the women's facility.
I didn't break it down by gender, but the process would be the same irrespective of gender. You're still talking, it's a 60-hour sentence. Somebody comes in for a short period of time and stays away from population. Honestly, people mostly sleep. They come in on a Friday after work. People mostly sleep through this sentence. We do have some concerns, though, in terms of safety thing. I hope it's not a grand surprise to the committee that people sometimes try and sneak contraband into our facility. I think that's probably been happening as long as prisons and jails have existed. And we certainly have ways of protecting against that. That's part of what we do. In 2020, we put in body scanners, similar to what you might see at an airport. That certainly helped. On the other hand, no system is perfect. And especially with street drugs these days and the lethality of them, you do not need a lot. A small package coming in can be very dangerous, especially to a population that has been sort of in a period of enforced sobriety, which those in our custody have been. There's certainly a risk of coercion when folks come in, especially on a non-violent, low-level sentence. If people know them outside and know they're coming in, we have seen that scenario in the past. And so you have risk of overdose when anything that comes in, either if it's passed to another person, if somebody is using it, if somebody, for instance, has swallowed a packet of drugs, it's not unheard of for that to open inside of somebody, to burst inside of somebody. And that's potentially a medical emergency, depending on what that happened. Again, these are rare circumstances. I'm not saying this is an every weekend thing, but even one is obviously significant. Any overdose in our system is obviously significant. So that's sort of where they pose the biggest challenge to the department, is in terms of taking up that bed in our admissions area and that risk of contraband, and then just sort of what we are unable to, or what we don't provide them during that period where they're incarcerated, because it really is a very minimal amount of services in a 60-hour incarceration. And I think that's the end of what I've got. It's a fairly simple process from DOC's end, but I'm happy to take any questions you guys might have.
So can you describe a little bit more of how it works when somebody does a community service?
Yep. Yeah, so they have to do, currently under the law, it's I believe 200 hours of community service. As I said, folks are generally on probation. And so there's a probation condition. They are responsible for finding the community service and notifying us of it. One thing that we have seen with that is 200 hours is actually a lot. And so sometimes it can sort of extend how long somebody is interacting with the department. And potentially the longer folks are under supervision, sort of the more chance that something's going to go wrong in that period. That somebody's life is going to get to a point where they're not doing their obligation. And so there is that possibility. Certainly you're not going to finish 200 hours in a weekend or a week or a month. But they're responsible for finding that and then providing the documentation to DOC and showing us when they've completed that. It's a fairly low lift on that end as well for us, not necessarily for the person.
So does DOC have any viewpoint of what would be an appropriate number of hours to trade the 60 hours?
The department doesn't have a position on this bill. It's really a policy and then a sentencing decision. And so that's really you folks and then the judiciary in terms of what's appropriate. We just wanted to tell you sort of what it looks like, what impacts it has on our system. And then I think it's really up to you guys to figure out what's most appropriate and what meets the needs of the legislature.
So I think you said you don't have any problems finding beds for these people when they do spend the weekend?
We always have problems finding beds, sir. Our system operates at about 135% capacity right now.
Okay.
So we are overpopulated. We do continue to have, as of this morning, about 120 people out of state housed in Mississippi, Vermonters serving Vermont sentences in Mississippi. So beds is constantly a problem for the department.
Okay.
And I would never say they're not. The relatively small numbers of folks that we're talking about here are not a huge impact on that problem. But obviously, they do take a bed. It is a impact. But yes, we always have challenges with beds.
So the numbers you put up there, they were like 5, 7, 12, whatever for, or 10, I guess it was 12 for, okay, I was right on the 12.
Yep.
Are any of those frequent flyers? You know what I mean? I'm sure you can. Frequent flyers.
I am familiar with the term. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. I'm sure at some point there's gonna be somebody that's probably gonna be coming in, but not, I'm gonna assume again or guess that it's doesn't happen enough.
No, and because this is at the DUI2 level, if folks do continue engaging in these crimes, they don't keep coming in as DUI2s. It moves up the ladder, obviously, and starts getting more significant charges.
And the difference cost between how somebody for the 6 hours and doing community service?
So I believe it's our current number is about $299 a day. It costs to incarcerate somebody. It sort of encompasses everything. So that's a fairly hefty bit for 60 hours. I don't know I have an exact cost for the field supervision, but that's going to be dramatically less because you're talking about a probation officer meeting with somebody intermittently. We're not providing healthcare, medical care, housing, 24-hour supervision, all those things. So,
Right. And it's not, while they're doing their community service, they're not.
we're not directly
Right.
supervising. No, we're not.
Right.
We're not directly. They're coming back and telling us they did that and providing documentation. So I think the lift on the department's end in terms of supervising that is fairly low and certainly less than I think it costs us to incarcerate those folks.
About $25 a day for someone.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
Karen and then Barbara.
So with these numbers, these are folks that are choosing the incarceration. Do you
Correct.
have numbers
I do not. I do not have. It's been a great number to have, but it was proved to be harder to find than one might expect.
Okay, and so we can assume that they're lower than these?
I believe so. I think so, but I'm not positive.
Okay, that just would be helpful because if folks
I know,
are
I agree.
already more are choosing the community service option, then that would be helpful to know.
Yeah, and yeah, good point. And I was unable to find those numbers in time for this committee.
Barbara and then Tom.
So I'm curious, how many days of sentencing kick into when somebody gets programming versus not?
So for risk intervention services programming, I think the shortest program we offer is 6 months for low risk sex offenders. And then that extends all the way up to 2 years. So we are 60 hours is well short of.
Right, okay. And so when you said somebody sleeps all day, like basically there's no requirement of like up at 7, breakfast is, it's.
We provide breakfast. It's usually around 5:30 or 6. And one can get up and eat that or not and get up and eat that and go back to bed. But other than that, basically if somebody's confined in the cell because of the contraband issue. We don't want them mixing in general population. So they're usually admissions. And yeah, folks generally sleep the day, maybe read a book or something, but there's not much to do in the course of that a weekend.
And when you say do they read a book, would they be bringing their own book to read?
No.
You have a
we have
library,
books.
okay.
Yeah.
So people have the option of reading.
Yep.
Are people coming in sort of medicated to sleep all day? Like, are they, I don't know what kind of screenings you're doing. Like
I don't know that I'm really prepared to speak to that. I don't think it's impossible, but we do screenings for folks who are custody. I don't know that it's a common thing either. And if somebody arrives sort of visibly impaired, then we do provide an affidavit to the court notifying them because that those sentencing mitts always say show up sober on this date. So if somebody was visibly impaired, we'd report that, but I'm sure it's not unheard of.
And is there any like closure interview, like you, in terms of, hey, you were sentenced to do this? I don't know if that.
If there any sort of conversation like that would occur with the probation officer, not on the jail side. In the incarcerative setting, come in Friday evening's a little bit busy, Monday morning's a little bit busy, get folks out so they can get off to work or wherever they're at, which is usually why folks are taking a sentence like this. But if there's really substantive follow-up on people's risks or what they learned from the experience or anything like that, that's going to occur with their probation officer in the community, irrespective of whether they're doing a 60-hour sentence or a community service sentence. That conversation would happen there.
And they're served 3 meals in the cell.
Yep.
Do they have a bathroom in the cell or they have to be escorted?
Generally there's a bathroom in the cells.
Are they in solitary or they're next to other people?
No, there's other folks around. There's other folks. One, the department does not practice solitary confinement, and 2, of all the places to do it, we certainly couldn't do it in admissions. It's one of the busiest places I've got, and the most folks rolling in and out of there. But it's not something we do in the department anyway. It's
I mean, I know it's not like by default it can happen, you know, right?
well, there's
Youth anyway.
yes, the youth issue is a whole separate issue.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
And you are correct there, but that is a very separate issue.
So when people do community service, do they normally do an 8-hour day?
I think it varies by person, by their availability and what the service availability is. And if folks are working, I think, most of us would probably find it challenging necessarily to squeeze an 8-hour day in. It might be easier to do 4 every Saturday or something. I don't know. There's some flexibility built into that on the person.
Right.
It's not entirely.
Yeah, what's turning in my head is the cost of the whole thing. If it's $25 a day, it would be, I think it'd probably be $25 no matter if it was 4 or 8 hours. And if you start getting into 4-hour shifts, then you're going over the cost of what it would be to have somebody in jail for the weekend. But with that, you said it's not easy to get the information for people doing community service, but not impossible to get it.
I wasn't able to find it in time for this committee. I can continue to look and see if that's a data point we can pull. Our system can be a little clunky, but I can certainly see if.
Yeah, that would be great if you could do that.
Yeah, well, let me see what I can do. And yeah, no, it certainly makes sense.
It may give us some information on, we may decide to leave it at 200 hours, depending on how many our people are using the community service, or it may change our minds to decrease it or.
Yeah, happy to go back and see what we can find.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Not seeing. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate it. And Marshall will have talk to us next.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Marshall Paul from the Office of the Defender General. So we are very supportive of this concept. When I raised this issue, when this bill came up, and I raised this issue with a lot of our DUI practitioners, got a lot of feedback that this was really a much needed change, that the disparity between the 200 hours of community service and the 60 hours of jail time has been significant, and it leads to some really I'm not sure that it's leading to the outcomes that were originally intended when that law was put into place. So one of the things, just first off, one of the questions I asked our DUI people is, who's choosing to do 60 hours of time and who's choosing to do the 200 hours of volunteer community service work? And if you look at the jail time as being the more sort of punitive option. The people who are actually taking that are the people who are the most already engaged in their communities. It's the people who are working, who already have jobs and working 40-plus-hour weeks. They're the ones who don't have time to take 200 hours off to do community service, but they can take a weekend off and serve it. Apologize, I can't do that. That's me. Just turn it off. Sorry, I always have my ringer off in here except today. So it turns out that the people who are getting hit with the 60-hour jail bid are the people who are already working 40-plus hours a week, are already engaged in their communities, and simply don't have the time to commit to, it takes really, that's a month of 40-hour weeks to do 200 hours of community service. So just from some people's perspective, it's really kind of skewing the incentives because the people who are really engaged in the workforce, engaged in the community, and already sort of doing the things that we want them to do are the ones that get hit with the jail time and really can't take advantage of the community service alternative. And it's the people who have a lot of time to spend and who may not be engaged in their community who really are sort of, have a lot of free time who are taking the 200 hours of community service. One of the problems that we've run into there, I asked also about community service, is some of our clients, especially the ones who may be struggling the most with substance use and mental health problems, have a real hard time getting community service hours. They approach places and seek to volunteer, and they're turned away because they've got other issues that make them not really a great candidate for community service. So what was suggested, and I think would be, a really good thing to think about in this bill, is maybe an alternative to community service. And what I would say is anything where we're sort of investing in someone and investing in the community is what we're after. So if somebody, rather than spending their community service hours, picking up trash or doing something like that, can spend their community service hours doing counseling, getting mental health screenings or assessments, engaging in job training, education, anything that's going to be sort of investing in themselves, investing in our community, trying to sort of make our community work a little bit better and make all the pieces fit together a little bit better. We would be supportive of not only shrinking that community service commitment, but also broadening the scope of what's counted for community service hours. And maybe even having some more sort of granular numbers in there so that, for example, 100 hours of community service time may be an appropriate amount of time. I asked one of our attorneys, what if it was 100 hours of time doing counseling? And they said, oh, that would be way too much. That honestly, if somebody was going to spend, week after week spending an hour unpacking past trauma and stuff like that, 20 hours might be really a pretty overwhelming amount of hours to put on somebody. And so maybe we should be fine tuning this based on what type of work people are doing, whether it's traditional, like picking up trash type of community service work, or whether it is job training or education or mental health screenings and treatment or substance abuse screening and treatment. There's also a suggestion to broaden. There's an exception in 1210C right now that allows that the credit for the 60 hours can be served in an inpatient alcohol rehabilitation facility. There was a suggestion to change that to allow that to be served with outpatient alcohol or substance abuse rehabilitation time. And that was important because it's actually really hard to get inpatient treatment right now. And a lot of the people who are getting like a DUI too don't even qualify. If you want to get inpatient treatment, you may not meet the criteria to get inpatient treatment. And they're guarding that pretty carefully right now because there's a lot of need for those inpatient beds. So that was another suggestion, was to expand that exception for inpatient treatment to cover more than just inpatient treatment. So we're very supportive of this. We are very interested to see how the language develops. And we think that overall, this is a really positive step, and that anything we can do where we are, instead of spending $300 a day incarcerating people who are going to sleep through their 60-hour sentence, if we can sort of refocus that energy and that effort into things that are going to help to sort of rebuild our communities, we think that's a positive thing and are supportive of any of those changes.
Karen?
Yes, so I'm curious, how long do folks get to complete their sentence? Is there like, you must do one of these options by a certain time?
That's really, I think, set by the term of probation typically. So usually people work that out in the courtroom. I mean, I've sat there and said, Your Honor, I think we're going to need a longer term of probation on this for my client to complete the amount of time, the number of hours they're going to need. So in my experience, it's worked out in the courtroom.
Okay, so it could be part of it, because I'm just thinking like 200 hour or whatever, like you probably need more time than if you just do a weekend piece of it. So is that decision made then in the courtroom of which route they're going to take?
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions for Marshall?
Let's say it's a weekend.
You mean a weekend?
Yeah, if they have if you were to report weekends and didn't do one or something, didn't show up. Is there a follow up or?
In my experience, you get a warrant.
Okay, so if it's set, it's.
Yeah, if you don't report, in my experience, you get a warrant.
So it'd be like a
Maybe
work crew
Yeah.
warrant and it's essentially met.
Yeah, I mean, we would submit an affidavit to the court saying Josh was required to report on such and such day. For this sentence, Josh failed to report. And then the court generally would issue a warrant.
And would that be set to just do the weekend or finish it?
Well, if we're talking a 60-hour sentence, usually it's a single weekend.
Right, but I mean, if there was like several weekends in a row, like or something like that. I'm just trying to.
That depends
see
on,
what's going on.
the court. The interrupt weekend sentences, very often I've seen them just add more weekends on the end.
All right.
But it really depends on the court. I suppose if somebody were to miss repeated weekends, the court might choose a different route on that, but usually we don't see that.
in my experience in those reporting violations, people don't get many chances. If you fail to report once, they don't give you the option of reporting the next time. They just take you right from the courtroom and that's it. So that's been my experience. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule.
So Marshall, the suggestion that it sounds like you're saying or suggesting that we sort of redefine community service.
Yes.
In your mind, would that need to happen at the same time as reducing the number of hours required?
Wouldn't have to happen at the same time, but I think my experience is that when we mess with an area of law, we tend to, once we mess with it, we leave it alone for a while. So I could, if we're going to make changes, kind of make them all at once and then leave it alone. And I would say, just as an example, in the juvenile courts, people get community service obligations all the time, and there's a very broad definition in the juvenile courts. So in the juvenile courts, community service can be satisfied by spending 5 hours working on your resume, counts for 5 hours of community service, spending 5 hours interviewing for jobs, counts as 5 hours of community service, volunteering at the Humane Society counts for 5 hours of community service. Anything that, it's in that case, it's DCF usually is monitoring the community service, and the way they look at it is really anything where you are improving the community or improving yourself, they'll count for community service.
And is that definition in
Not-
statute?
They're not written down anywhere. That's just a definition of practice.
Okay. So this could theoretically work the same way?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look a little bit closer. I think that on the criminal side, I don't think there's been as much flexibility in terms of what counts as community service. And typically I always advise people to go down to resource. That's where I tell them to go volunteer, and that typically they get hours from resource. So that's been what I do. I think it's different in every county. It's different from attorney to attorney where they refer people.
And who might we look to for guidance, if we do need to spell it out more clearly in the criminal realm? Like, I'm just thinking if this is So there's potentially going on the miscellaneous bill. I don't know how much time we're devoting to it, but I like this idea and I wonder who would be in a position to say, like, this is what would DOC say that we sure we can widen the.
I always try not to just turn the questions around, but I think this is one where it would be this committee that would decide how broad or narrow that definition should or shouldn't be.
Sure, I'll take that.
Karen.
To follow up, I agree, and I'm guessing that community services referenced in lots of places within it, so it wouldn't be just in this situation. Like it would be potentially opening up the definition for however it's used in criminal law.
It's a good question, and I cannot answer you except to say that it's my experience that if I've not, it's my experience that most of the terms that we use in criminal law, we use in various ways and we define it in various ways. And I would doubt that this is an exception to that rule.
Keep
So
up
I
with the
think it would be-
inconsistency.
I think it would be a good idea to start to create some consistency. But I'm just knowing that there's differences between how it's interpreted in the criminal context and in the juvenile context. If you're asking me, do you think it's interpreted consistently in the criminal context? I'd say, if so, it's probably the only thing that is consistently interpreted in the world of criminal law. So my guess is going to be no.
Thank you.
Going straight. How many people are doing community service work right now in current climate? Is there a lot? Is it outrageous?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think it's a large number.
More than 50?
I'd really have to look. I really don't want to guess.
Okay.
I mean, I'll tell you just based on my experience, it's really common in juvenile dispositions in juvenile court and not very common at all in criminal sentences. So that's my experience is we deal with community service all the time in juvenile court and barely ever in criminal court.
We did create something called the alternative community sentence as an alternative to work crew. I think there has been low uptake on some of the.
It's sort of what I was thinking about it, like the difference between work crew and community services, someone's watching over you do something.
Right. There's similarities.
And every day they're whatever they are contributing to is gonna, vary, I'm sure. But it just seems to make sense. If they're not getting something, if the first part, the most important part is they show up to do whatever it is they're supposed to do. They showed some responsibility there and then they get something done. And I don't think you really necessarily need somebody watching them to do that. I mean, if they fail and then.
I say you just identify yourself for the record.
Yes, I stand a policy director for DSC.
Thanks. Ian.
So I understand about redefining what community service is, but do you have a number if we're going to change from 200?
No, so what I asked are sort of a select pool of regular DUI practitioners is what would be the number that would sort of make it kind of an equal balance for most of your clients. And I've only heard from about 4 or 5 people so far, and I have not gotten anybody to commit to a number. I had one person say, maybe just cut it in half and call it 100, but I think they were just kind of, I don't think that was a substantive answer. I think that was a cutting it in half kind of answer. I would say, honestly, to keep it more in line with the term of incarceration, that a 60-hour term of incarceration, when you count into that there's some overnights in there, it's a lot like a 40-hour work week. And I would say 40 hours is, if you can get somebody on a DUI to actually devote a full work week to community service, I'd say that's a really positive thing and probably adequate for sort of commensurate to the alternative sanction that's available, the 60 hours of incarceration over a weekend.
And just and is it accurate that this isn't the only punitive element of getting a DUI too? That there's a civil component, and
Yeah,
can you
certainly.
explain what that is?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
I can do that if you prepare me to do it, but if you ask me to do it.
But just
I'm happy
that
to do
if someone
it.
gets a DUI too, there's probably going to be a license consequence
Oh,
as
yes.
well.
Yeah.
And that is a punitive element. Okay.
Yeah, there'll be a license suspension or an interlock, then there's certainly.
Correct.
And interfere with community service,
What's that?
which may interfere with being able to do community service. Just, I mean, it's just worth.
Well, yeah, again, it would depend on how long you had community service too.
Other questions from Mark? That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good to hear from you.
McManus, Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. Thank you for having us in. As you might imagine, we have not had an opportunity to survey our field on this short form bill. We are interested in the conversation though. Quick conversations with state's attorneys. What we see in practice because of the way second offense DUIs are set up is anecdotally, and I do not have numbers for you, so this is all anecdotal. Individuals will choose the weekend sentence over the community service. It's just generally easier to do. The other reality is because the second offense is so constricted as far as what disposition you can do. Often it will be a negotiation, sometimes negotiating the charge down to a DUI 1 or a neg op so that you can open and broaden the disposition. So we are definitely open to this conversation. One thing that I found very interesting, and I'll check more on my end on this, that DOC said that most individuals who have this offense, potentially the community service condition, are on probation. And if that's true, wonderful. One of the things, and again, this is sometimes a negotiating piece on the ground, is if the individual just wants community service and doesn't want to be on probation, then what we see happening is there's no way to supervise that. So what will sometimes be negotiated out is that the case will get continued out, giving the person the opportunity to complete their community service, show proof of that, and then get that disposition of just having community service ordered. You can imagine that, and one other piece, but a small piece of some backlog issues, that to get 200 hours of community service can take a really long time, depending on how you're doing that. So that is a piece there. So flexibility around those hours, where we are interested in that. We do not have a magic number, but we definitely appreciate the volume and how difficult that is to do that service. But if you are looking to play around with that number, we would ask that you look into probation being required so that somebody is overseeing it. And it can be administrative probation, but that there's some sort of check-in and some help for individuals to connect for these opportunities, because I do think we can all agree that just the act of going and asking for community service hours and how to set that up is a big task for some individuals who might be in this subset. Sorry. Is there a question?
Probably not be, but what's required to prove completion of community service?
I think that probably ranges a bit. In my personal experience, I had a few cases which were not DUI related, but were sort of creative dispositions, again, continuing a case out for someone to do community service and then potentially dismissing the case. And in that case, I would require a letter from the provider, whatever agency had the community service.
That's what DOC would require as well.
I think generally.
So if they were placed on probation with some conditions, and one of them is being doing community service, you could oversee them fairly easily in a probationary
Yeah, so some sort of letter authenticating the hours, but probation
That
will
would
be able
yeah, that'd be
to,
consistent with what we asked for.
yeah, but probation will actually be able to verify that. Whereas when there is no probation, you're just taking that. You can call, you would call potentially to follow up on that.
So I, as a nonprofit provider, have had people do community service, sometimes for the university, somebody, but sometimes for the courts. And there's like a timesheet that we've had people fill out and then written a letter once we also have the backup documentation. And it would, so it's not that difficult to do and it seems to be important. One comment in terms of hours, it's interesting because I teach a 4-credit class at UVM and students are required to do 100 hours during the semester to get 4 credits and come to class. And so I'm thinking about the requirement in here and how much that is compared to a week. Like if my students had a choice that you can spend the weekend sleeping or you can do 200 hours.
Yeah, and then our department definitely appreciates that disparity and that maybe if the numbers changed on the community service side, you might see more individuals choose that. I mean, that just makes sense.
Other questions? Angela, then Tom.
I know, I feel like we got the same exact moment. Well, it just occurred to me that I have a story in my head. I want to check my understanding with you. What is the benefit to community service over incarceration? I know how that sounds, but I mean, like, in terms of incentivizing and the sort of perverse incentive currently, I'm just thinking like, what is it's 40 hours of community. So I don't know. I'm just wondering like, what do people consider when they're making these decisions in addition to the time it takes to do 200? I mean, like, obviously 200 hours is a lot of a bigger commitment. But is there any benefit to doing community service other than not spending time in prison?
Well, as far as the benefit to the individual who's doing it, I mean, I think that would range as far as what that person's taking in from their experience. I think the message that would likely come from the state, if it's saying, choose one, is that your behavior has harmed your community. This second DUI offense, you put community members at risk, and this is an opportunity to give back to your community. Whether individuals feel that or sense that, and I think that would be very dependent on the individual. I think there is a benefit if someone was connected with a well-run nonprofit. That individual may learn something that they didn't know, may meet people that they didn't know. I can only imagine ideally a web of connection, right? If it all went well versus a weekend. But again, I don't know. We have at this moment have no number in mind, whether it needs to be more than the 60 hours or whether it can be the same served inside or outside, or whether there needs to be a different calculation because you're not going inside. That we would leave to you all to think more about. Then I can ask around for more opinions on that.
Okay, thanks. I'm just curious. And this is part of the policy decision, I suppose, but what are we actually trying to accomplish? And how you incentivize in that direction intentionally? Because I think there are a ton of benefits, and it is much more aligned with a restorative approach, obviously. But I'm just not sure how to make that matter enough. I guess.
And again, I think I would imagine it would depend so much on the individual. The stigma for me personally to have to go to jail for children for the weekend. I would, would have a different reason for finding a way to do 200 hours of community service versus someone else. That would be me, personally. So I think that would matter so much. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if the committee would be able to wrap around that factor of how the individual feels about a few days in jail versus not.
It almost doesn't seem like there's a balance there, otherwise you'd have an equal number of people choosing.
Right.
I,
Like, is there something else we could offer if you choose community service, some other benefit?
Tom and Coach.
100% guaranteed, fail-safe way to get people the community service. Increase the jail time. Just saying. But with that's, I got more of a statement. It came up and what was on my mind is more of a balance. And for whatever reason, my balance is the same amount of people taking the jail time as the community service. But what number is that as far as hours go? And I had mentioned it to the chair earlier, just as an idea, maybe decrease the number of hours and see how many people take advantage of it and have a sunset on it every year or 2 years. And it would take, a couple of years to get that balance, but that's just the balance that I have in my head is someplace around a 50-50. So.
Coach, then Ian.
Morning. Thanks for your testimony today. What I find interesting is over time, prior to the dissolving of a lot of the public community service programs that we used to have, it would be interesting to see what the data shows, as far as what people are requesting, because DOC does do extensive charting and reporting of prisoner data. It would be interesting to see what those numbers look like, because I remember distinctly hearing some of the testimony years ago around some of the decisions people were making, and having the opportunity, for example, one was, to be outside, and, helping out, and that goes back to your point. If they had something they could offer back, it was kind of the restitution restorative point that Angela was talking about. And we've seen that. It would just be interesting. I wonder if there is any data out there on that. That's a question.
I think the question's for DOC.
And based on what you said, I'm almost thinking DOC won't have great data on that because the ones on probation are the only ones we see. If there are folks who are taking the community service and not being placed on probation, they're essentially invisible to DOC. We absolutely know who comes into our facilities. I'm sure we can find how many are doing that community service on probation. Might be challenging, but I think we could get there. But those other ones would be invisible to us.
And then on that piece, again, I'm happy to reach out to see if we can get a handle or an idea on those numbers, and to the larger point of, percentage of choosing the weekend versus community service hours, and then possibly a breakdown between probation and non-probation. Might take a little bit though.
Great. Because that would be helpful from a policy perspective. Instead of just trying to pick things out of the air, and then that would support Representative Burdett's point about changing or experimenting with changing the duration. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Ian?
Just on Tom's point, Kim, the 60 hours of jail time is the minimum, correct?
It's worded as at least.
So can a prosecutor ask for more time?
I believe so, but this is not, DUI is not my area. I would need to bring in our
Yeah.
DUI folks. It's worded as at least 200 hours or 60 consecutive hours shall be served. I have to really check, but generally speaking, it's 60 hours,
Mhm.
but I would have to ask someone more knowledgeable than I, how often there's more hours given.
Any other questions, Kim? No, Sadie, thank you very much. So I don't know if this one's going to be ready for the miscellaneous bill. It depends on, as a co-sponsor, Ian, how much you formulate some language with your.
I can do that.
And then we'll have to have some more testimony based on that language. I mean, is this something we should pursue? I mean, is this worth having Ian looking into that?
Community discussion.
Yeah, this is committee discussion. Yes, what do you think?
I just want to say, because I don't want to testify when we're having witnesses, but like in my own experience, I'm pleading out a DUI 2 on Monday, where my guy is taking the 60 hours instead of the 200 hours of community service for this exact reason that we're talking about. Like this is totally a real issue, and I think it is worth the committee's time to try to find something if we have agreement. I don't know about the timing, like how much time to have it be, but yeah. And I think the probation, like my experience has been everybody's on, like they're usually on probation when they're doing the community service. So they have that check-in. And one of the issues is they have to have a lengthier probationary period so that they can complete the 2 years community service instead of being on a shorter probation, which is actually in the interest of justice because they don't have to spend 200 hours doing it.
How long is probation, if they did the 60, if they did the weekend, how long is the probation?
It's all,
Normally compared to when it's the 200.
I think it's all up to the negotiations between the parties, and it usually has to do with the severity of the the fact pattern. And if there are, what other conditions of probation, like completing substance abuse treatment programming, things like that, giving them enough time to do that, and also having the whatever else they need to do. But from my side, it's like, but if they're going to add the 200 hours of community service, I'm going to be like, they're going to need more time, just like what Marshall was saying.
It's get hit double almost in a sense with probation and 200 hours. I mean, I'm willing to have the discussion. It's a matter of if we can come to a conclusion, in a reasonable amount of time to get it potentially get it into the miscellaneous bill.
Right. We give it a little bit of time. We have a little bit of time. We how they help. So it's not a definite, but it's just one worth at least continuing to look at. Seems to be interested in that.
Who's our pledge council on this?
Yeah, it's always been.
Yes.
It's been. All right, so is it the committee's desire to have a short break before we shift to asphalt? Let's do that. Let's be back at
This guy?
2 o'clock. Let's be back at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.